We're in a series, we're calling it Life in the Valley. And here's the idea, the image we're looking at is, there are times in life where, man, we say, living on the mountaintop. And for some of you, maybe on your vacation right now, and you go, man, this is fantastic. And I hope that's your experience. Many of us, we have mountaintop experiences and just good times and great seasons of life. But then we also have what we call life in the valley. You know what that's like. For some of us, even now, we have a valley that we're in. It could be relationally. Man, it's so sad to hear, when of children going away or just being disconnected from their parents or grandparents, and it's heartbreaking. That's a valley because it's something you feel like was taken from you, something that certainly we could say, God, that's not fair. Some of us are in marital valleys. No matter what you do, your spouse just simply replies that their heart's cold. That's a valley. For some, it can be a health issue. For some, it can be job or, worrying about what's going to happen with your 401k or, there's so many different areas that this could apply. And I know because it's just a real part of life, this is something we all need to know because what do we want to do when we're in the valley? Get out, right? And sometimes we'll do whatever it takes. And the problem is, sometimes it's valleys that we're in there because we just made stupid decisions, right? Sometimes we directly disobeyed God. And we think God's getting us back. It's not necessarily the truth. But the Lord will allow us to feel the negative consequences of wrong choices. But sometimes, watch, God will lead you into the valley. Because it's in the valley where things grow. And that's where God grows our deepest roots, our righteousness. This is where character change happens. And often God will allow a valley to happen before He allows you to be set up for the new assignment, the new plan that He has for you. Now, we're all looking for the new plan, right? Come on, God, let's go. I want to get the promotion. I want to move here. I want to experience this. I want to take this on. But there's often a valley before. So we're going to look, as we have been last few weeks, we're going to look at actually a different story. We're going to look at a guy named Elijah. He was an Old Testament prophet, and he, as a man of God, was led into the valley, so to say. But that's where God does His greatest work. So let me tell you a little bit of the context here before we get into our notes. First of all, it's really sad. If you look at the history of Israel, we have King David. He was a great king. Downfalls like all of us, but a great king. And then after that was his son Solomon, who was the wisest man in all the world. But what's so sad is Solomon got away from the Lord. And then every king afterwards, it seems. If you read the history and through 1 Kings, it talks about the next king. It says, but this king did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Then they have a new king, and it says, and this king did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. It's so sad. And this is a country that had so much going for it. And then because of leadership, bad leadership, it changed. The whole culture and the society changed. Now, there's a story, there's King Ahab. And if you read 1 Kings, the very end of chapter 16, you know what it says? This guy was the worst of all of them. He was a scumbag, selfish, dirty, rotten scoundrel, and he didn't care. He only cared about himself and his wife. And so one of the main laws that God gave, commands to the kings, those that were going to be responsible, especially for setting up this new society and to be God's people in His land that He gave them, one of the primary rules, he said, is do not intermarry with the foreigners. It's not a race thing or a geographical thing. It was because God knew how easily we can be tempted and we can compromise, and the next thing you know, we don't even have the same beliefs we used to. You may have someone in your family like that, maybe your children. It's heartbreaking, and God knows that we're prone to that. And so He made this a really hard line. He said, don't do this, because once you do that, it's just a slippery slope. Like, it'll be a compromise and another compromise, and you're just out of my will. And that's exactly what Ahab did. He married a princess from a different land. Her name was Jezebel. And, in our culture, even if you don't know the Bible, you know what Jezebel is. Not a good name. You don't want to name your daughter that, right? You may not know exactly what all that means, but, that's not what you want to bring in your family. And Jezebel is a lady who is controlling and manipulative. And though the king, Ahab is the king, he's really the puppet for Jezebel. And so what happens is Jezebel brought in her culture. They worshiped Baal, a false god, which was pretty popular at that time, but certainly not in Israel, although it was there. But Jezebel, being who she was, brought it in. And it wasn't just enough to have people be tolerant to allow others to worship Baal. They promoted it. I mean, it goes against exactly what God wanted. And it was to the point where even King Ahab, right, who's supposed to be the main representative and leader of God's people, he built an altar to Baal, a temple to Baal. And it says even he bowed down to Baal. Now, he might in his mind think, it's just innocent. We know there's only one real God. It can't be Baal. But even then, by just doing that, it was a compromise. So these are not good times. Not good times. And imagine if you grew up in a culture, and it was a culture that had great values and, one belief in God alone and just solid. And that was really not just a belief, but your identity. And it's just been taken away. I mean, any of us in that situation, we would go, these are horrible days. This is a valley for us as a society. But we're going to see how it becomes a valley for Elijah. And in that, I think we'll find, what do we do? Because if this is a valley, a downer of a season, but if it's orchestrated by God, it's not just a get out of it real quick. Make a good decision, then get out. You have to endure. That's always the word. And we're going to see how that plays off in this passage. So, by the way, Baal is known as the storm god. So he's the God who is in control of the rain. Okay, now in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1, it says, Now Elijah told King Ahab, as surely as the Lord, and whenever you see it, it's in all capitals, that's where the word in Hebrew would be for Yahweh, God's personal name. So that's like the special name for God. As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God that I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. That's a bold statement. There's always dew. I mean, in some ways, this whole land is surrounded by water. You got the rivers and Mediterranean. There's dew everywhere. And so it looks like it's going to be a showdown between Yahweh and the God of the storm, right? Baal. That's what Elijah's setting up. Verse 2. It says, And the Lord said to Elijah, so he makes this announcement. Then God says, Go to the east and hide by the Kerith brook, near where enters the Jordan River. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. So Elijah, keyword, Elijah did as the Lord told him. And he camped beside Kerith brook, east of Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. Now, I love how God ordered his steps. First he said, okay, go. And he gave directions. Go to the Kerith brook. And here's what I love about it. This is like a secret, like no one knew about this place. It was pretty desolate. Even to the point he has to tell them, hey, okay, it's over, it's near the Jordan River. It's the east side of it, go, and it's not like he could say, oh, go to the city. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's the perfect place for him to hide, to be away from the king's harm. Because again, with Ahab and Jezebel, if you said anything negative about them, they're coming after you. Well, Elijah just confronted him, said, God's not going to let it rain over your rain, God. And just confronted him, and so they're after him. But I love how God had this secret source of water for him, for Elijah. He's going to take care of him. And I love how God had a supernatural source for food. Isn't that amazing? The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening. Now, I'm guessing it's not Chick-fil-A, but not Meals on Wheels, but maybe Food by Feathers or something, like that. I don't know. But isn't that amazing? If God said, hey, I want you to go out here to the wilderness and you need to hide out there because this is going to be your safe place and I'm going to take care of you. If God literally said that to you, wouldn't you go, well, hold on. And we're going to ask, okay, where's the map? And I need to see it on my GPS here. Where am I going? How are you going to take care of me? And what's the agenda? We'll have this list of questions for God. And all that does is slow up for God to do his will. But Elijah just went. And what I love is how even though God orchestrated this drought, a great time of need, he still took care of Elijah. I think that is what we can embrace here. When you're in a valley, and we have a lot of questions, regardless of what the questions are when we're asking about the details. Here's a truth we need to embrace. We can trust God in the valleys. He's the one. And even in the valley, God is still in control. We may not have all the details, but we can trust in him. And we still need to obey him. Okay, so you think, okay, we get through this, like the king's going to want to get him, but now he's got this hideout place. This is perfect. It'll just play out. But let's look at verse 7. But after a while, the brook dried up, for there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. It's a valley in a valley. Like, man, you thought you had a pretty good setup to get you through, but then all of a sudden, that plan seems to change. For some of us, maybe you're in a valley and you thought you had good news from the doctor, but then they tell you some other news. And you're like, oh, God, how can I go through this? Maybe you thought you were making progress and feeling more secure in a relationship or at work or just in life, and then you find out other news. Even in these times, guys, we can trust God. For some, we're lonely, and we're just like, I just need to get married. And for some, it's not that. It's just the opposite. Like, you just want to isolate right now. You just want everyone to stay away from you. No matter what you're going through, the Lord will get you through the valley, but you just got to trust him. You got to obey him. So let's look at how do we get prepared to get out of the valley. Again, just doing these things doesn't get you out, but it's getting you to be in position so you can get out when it's time to get out. Number one, when you're going through the valley, be ready for the Lord to change the plans. You remember the old Ginsu knife commercials? They tell you this fantastic offer. They go, but wait, there's more. Don't you feel like God's sometimes doing that with your life? You're going, more? I don't want more. I want to get out. But that's what it is. It's a change. Look at verse 8. It says, then the Lord said to Elijah, and that's the whole verse right there. It's setting up what's coming next. The Lord has another plan. The plan we had was only temporary. The plan's going to change. If you know much about football, think of this. Whenever they have a pass play, and I'm going to talk elementary because I don't know, levels of knowledge. Okay, here's the point. Quarterback, of course, we have Tom Brady, the world's best, right? Okay, so we know he's going to throw the ball where it needs to go. But imagine if you're a wide receiver. It's not simply as easy as running the route that you plan to run and then be in that position. When you're running your route at the beginning of the play, when he says hut and you take off, there are people on the other team trying to hit you, trying to knock you off course. Now, they can't tackle you, but all they got to do is hit you enough to get you out of the way, out of your route, so that when you get to where you're supposed to be, the ball's been there already, long before you got there. Man, isn't that a picture of life? Like, you think you know what you're supposed to do, but you keep getting bumped by situations and relationships and circumstances, but that's life. You got to run. And your whole goal is to get to the right position. But even then, it's not just simply showing up. Now, you're getting hit, you get into position, then you know what you got to do? You have to be alert and ready for the ball. You don't know if he threw the ball here. You don't know. So you get into the right position, then you got to stop and you got to be aware and be ready and look. And you think, what's the next move? Am I putting my hands here? Like, how do I respond to this? And then, if the quarterback ever has to go scrambling, which means he's running for his life, you know what that means? We have a new plan, right? The plan we had's over. So you don't keep running your route. You stop and you have to go to, again, there's always a plan B. And so there's, you have this. That's why the relationship between quarterback and the receiver is so important, because you sort of intuitively know each other. And in that same way, the more we know God and his word, we can know where we need to be. Even when we get bumped, we still know where to be. But as we have our daily time with God, in his word, in prayer, and just fellowshipping with him, we know, do I respond here or here? And then if something totally goes different that was unexpected, some kind of valley or circumstance, surprise, we have to go to plan B. And that happens by intuitively knowing what the Lord wants for you. That only comes from spending time with him. But I think that's what's happening here. We had a plan. Elijah, you're going to the Kerith Brook. You're going to hang out there. Brook dries up. Verse 8. Thankfully, the Lord said to Elijah, we got something else going on here. God doesn't leave us alone, or even for us to try to figure it out on our own. I remember when my kids were younger, like really young, and they would have to take some kind of prescription medicine. Isn't that the worst, parents? Thank God Publix has great flavor for their medicine. I remember when we were kids, they didn't have flavors, did they? No, drink the penicillin now. That's horrible, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Anyway. And I remember one time, I'm sure it was spring, not Eli, because Eli's way too mature for this. Publix didn't have great flavor. I said, that's not a problem. And I brought it home and found out it's a problem. We got a real problem here, And why? Because he sniffed it. It was like antibiotics, and he smelled it. I'm like, it's a spoonful. Shut up and swallow it. Come on, it's a spoonful. No! You thought I was declaring war against him. Or her. On the sister, right? Oh, my. And I have a very different perspective, because I'm the dad. As parents, we go, it's a stupid mouthful. Just take it, right? Take it. Man, they had a whole different perspective. Think about this. Aren't there times you think, when God says, come on, obey me. We're going, whoa, God, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't taste good. I don't like this. And God's going, just swallow it. Okay, yeah, it's yucky for a moment, but not long. Here's water to drink it down. God, he knows what's best for us. And so there will be times where the plans change, but that's okay. That's okay. Here's what is important for me to say in this section. The change of plans is never a surprise to God. And it's never God changing his mind. You can count on that. It's just we didn't know things were going to change, but God did. And so when he changes them, the best thing to do is just obey him. That's the quickest way out of the valley. Just obey God. Even if you don't understand, even if you don't think it's fair, even if you don't like it, just obey God. Life is so much better when we simply obey him and receive what he has for us. So whether you're in the mountaintop or the valley, always be ready, for the Lord will change your plans. Point number 2. When you're in the valley, it's important to remember the Lord's faithfulness. Remember, God has been faithful to you, even in the valleys, even in the surprises of life. You know, when God changes our plans, it's often a scary place. But the key is, in spite of your fear or you dislike, just obey him. And you have enough to obey him because you know that he's been faithful in the past. That should encourage you. That's why, was it last week we talked about journaling? Writing down and remembering what the Lord has done in your life allows you to look back and say, God was trustworthy. I was praying for something else and God still did something, but now I see that was absolutely the best decision. I think of David in this. When he showed up as a little shepherd boy, and there's Goliath, the big giant. Remember, this isn't just a child's story. This is real life war. And David was the only one that went out to fight the giant. And in 1 Samuel 17, it talks about how David said, as a shepherd, again, he's probably 13, 14 years old. As a shepherd boy, he was telling the story. He said, you know, I'm here to protect my sheep. And if anyone ever took the sheep, I'd take a club to him and I'd knock that animal out. And if the animal didn't let go or he turned on me, I killed the thing. Exclamation point. Then he said, I did it to lions and even to bears. And he said, no one should do that or treat us like that because we're God's people. No one should talk about our God like that, like Goliath and all those guys were. He was willing to face the giant because he knew he's experienced God doing the impossible in his life previously. I love that. Again, it's not his trust in his ability or his expertise. It's in God. Here's what it says in verse 9 for Elijah's story. God says, go and live in the village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon, for I have instructed a widow there to feed you. Okay, so he had a hideout, but then the brook dried up. God said, okay, go here now. I need you to go over here to the village, a little village. And he was, I think, able to walk out and boldly go quickly, only because he knows that he could trust God. He remembered of God's past faithfulness. Point number 3. This is not just for valleys. It's for every day. I think God wants us to be like this. Be quick to say yes to God. Whatever he asks of you, yes. In fact, Charlene and I always talk about how we want to be in such a surrendered place to the Lord that even before he asks the question, we're already saying, yes, Lord, whatever you want today, I want to do it. Be quick. I think that's where Elijah was. Look what it says in verse 10. It just simply says, so he went to Zarephath, that village. And as he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, would you please bring me a little water in a cup? As she was going to get it, he called her, and bring me a bite of bread too. But she said, I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. And I have only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was gathering a few sticks, right, just now, to cook this last meal, and then my son and I would die. Now, wouldn't that blow your mind? And you're thinking, well, I obviously picked the wrong widow to talk to. This can't be God's will. And it was exactly, she's the one. Verse 13. Let me get some water. Look how Elijah replies to her. Because if we just took God out of the equation, we'd go, man, what a rude, selfish guy. But he knows it's of the Lord. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Now, I wish I knew what she was thinking when he said that. Because if you think this is all you have, it's going to your kids. It's not going to some stranger, right? Then what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son? For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Again, gives another message. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again. So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her son continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. That's something. Why did God pick this lady? Like, hell, I'm thinking, God, you got to be picking someone who's like got the resources. And let's get the birds back in the story. Come on, at least we had meat then. Here's what I think is insightful. Sometimes the Lord allows us to go through the valleys because the valleys are not always about us. Looking at this story, don't you see? This isn't just about Elijah. It's about this lady. What is she going to learn about God? I mean, that's the test. It's her trying to. Would you give up food for a stranger? What about her son? To see her mom obey because God said to do this. She believed and she did that. This little boy saw a miracle of God day after day after day until the rain came and they didn't need that little jug of oil or jar of flour. We see here part of this valley is really about this family. It's going to change their life forever. Also, we see in God's story in a valley, sometimes God will dry up your source. And it's not because he's mad at you, but because he's got a new plan. He wants you to move. Some of us, maybe we need to move out of a relationship because it keeps pulling us down. Some of us, maybe we need to move out of literally the area or move out, I don't know, make the application. But God will often have our sources right because it's just time for us to go. God has the next season, the next chapter for us. And I just want to encourage you. If you're in the valley, don't quit. Don't quit. The last thing in your notes. On the other side of the valley is your victory. You know, we never know when the Lord's going to get us out. But just don't quit. It can be tiring when you're in the valley. I know, I get it. I've been there. We've all have. And here's what I want to say. As long as I'm your pastor, I will never quit on you. I always want to be your encourager to say, you can do this. Because it's not you on your own. It's the Lord through you. And if God's called you to it, he will give you the power to walk through it. This is his valley. Obey him. You know, we never know how long the valleys are. but God will give you the endurance to get through them. That's the joy. And it's not just learning a lesson of words, but it's walking through an experience with the presence of the God and knowing what he can do. If you would, please bow your heads.